I'm Andrea from Lemoore, California, and you're watching Gospel Tangents, your best source for Mormon history, science, and theology.
I'm excited to introduce Bryndis Roberts. She's a convert to the LDS Church from the Baptist Church, and I understand she gave her missionaries quite a run for their money. I know she asked them about the polygamous past as well as the priesthood ban and temple ban in the LDS Church. So we'll talk more to her about that conversion and what it was like to come from the Baptist Church. Now back to our conversation. I'd also like to remind you to please subscribe on our website. Go to gospeltangents.com and click the yellow subscribe button. I'll send you a transcript of this interview and all future interviews for just $10 a month. Also, if you'd just like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe on our patreon.com/gospeltangents page, and you can hear the whole thing without interruptions. Now back to our conversation. Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm really excited. I have a guest all the way from Atlanta, Georgia with us today. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Bryndis Roberts, and as Rick said, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I am a member of the Atlanta Ward. I joined the church in January 2008, so I celebrated my 10th anniversary last year. I'm active in a number of Mormon-related groups. I'm currently serving as chair of the Executive Board of Ordained Women.
All right, well, that's awesome. Well, great. So why are you here in Utah today?
I'm here with the conference that held at the University of...
Utah Valley University.
Yeah, at Utah Valley University.
Well, that's great. And the conference was about what?
The title of the conference was Women in Mormondom.
That's right. That's right. So there were a lot of women. I have to confess a sin a little bit. I always feel like I want to be very diverse, but I always interview white Mormon men. It seems like, and not only, but the majority of my guests are. And so it's wonderful to hear your story today. And so I'd like to share with my audience. We're interested in Mormon history. And one of the things that has always struck me, I actually know that I have a few non-Mormon listeners that have contacted me. And so I have a friend, I believe he's in London, he's Kenyan, and he says, you need to talk to more people about what it was like to join the church that had a ban up until 1978. And so... you said you joined in 2008.
In 2008, yes.
And you investigated the church very, very well. And I must say, I don't think I would have joined the LDS Church if I'd have known what you knew before I joined. Before you joined, I mean.
Okay. Well, if you're talking about the racial background of the church, I mean, growing up in the South, all of the churches had segregation. I mean, that's why there is a National Baptist Convention as well as a Southern Baptist Convention. That's why there were AME churches and CME churches as well as the United Methodist Church. What struck me about the LDS Church is that whereas other churches in the South started doing away with their outwardly segregationist practices in the 50s or at least in the 60s, it took the LDS Church until 1978. So it was like it took the LDS Church much longer to deal with some of the issues, and actually the church still hasn't dealt with all of the issues arising from that. But yes, I knew about those things, but I also felt that the church's focus on the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and I really believe that the concept of the priesthood, that the church's adherence to that and lifted the church and its members up from some of the past mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. So as I understand it, you grew up Baptist.
Yes.
And so, you told an interesting story about wanting to learn about Mormonism. You went to Barnes and Noble and couldn't find one there, and some other things like that. So what piqued your interest in the Book of Mormon specifically?
Well, as I said earlier today, in 2007, I embarked on this very intense study of the Scriptures, and I really started trying to read a lot of different religious texts. And initially, I wasn't going to read the Book of Mormon because I did not know a whole lot about it. The one time in the past that I had tried to pick it up and read it, I had done it like you do the Bible. You know, when you want some inspiration from the Bible, sometimes you'll just open it up, and wherever it opens up, you'll read and take inspiration from those verses. Sometimes that works well, sometimes it doesn't. But when I had done that with the Book of Mormon, it made no sense to me. I didn't recognize any of the characters who were being talked about. I didn't recognize the situations. It said it was another testament of Jesus Christ, but it was like at least the part I opened wasn't really talking about Christ, so I sort of put it aside. But while I was doing this intense Bible study, I was also watching a lot of religious television, and I actually had flipped past BYU a couple of times and had not really been able to watch it because it was just a lot of, at least it seemed to me, older white men just kind of going wonk, 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 wonk. But one night I was at my house and sitting in my den, and I guess I fell asleep, and I guess I fell asleep on my remote control because when I woke up, my television was on BYU. And this particular night, it didn't seem quite as much wonk, wonk, wonk as it had in the past. So I left it on, but I wasn't really paying attention to it. I got up and left my den and went into the kitchen and started making myself a snack or doing something like that. Then I heard singing, and you know, of course, I'm sure you hear singing quite a bit on BYU, but then I recognized it was a black person singing, and then I recognized that it was Gladys Knight singing. At that time, I did not know that Gladys Knight was a member of the church, so it intrigued me and piqued my interest as to why Gladys Knight was on BYU-TV singing. So I came back into my den, I sat down, I listened to her sing her song, and then she bore her testimony about having joined the church. And it just seemed that as I was listening to her testimony, this spirit of peace, or whatever you want to call it, filled my den. So that's when I decided that I wanted to read the Book of Mormon, and that's when I set off to try to find one.
Now, have you met Gladys? Does she know this?
No, she does not know this.
That's great. I'd love to get her on. That would be awesome. Well, that's fantastic. So you started going to like Barnes and Noble looking for a Book of Mormon?
Well, actually, I started out, silly me, I guess, at a religious bookstore, because, I mean, I had always gone to a religious bookstore when I wanted, quote, religious books. So I went to my local religious bookstore, the one I go to all the time, and the proprietor, or the person who's behind the counter, the reaction when I asked for the Book of Mormon was somewhat a look of being aghast, I guess, and he directed me to this corner in the back of the store, and there was no Book of Mormon there, but there were all of these books about cults and devil worship, and I guess there might have been one about witchcraft, I don't know. But anyway, it was clearly the section of these are the things you should avoid. And so I came back up to the front and said, no, I actually wanted a Book of Mormon. And then he sort of told me in a huff that they didn't carry that. So then, having not found it at the religious bookstore, I thought, okay, Barnes & Noble has everything. So I went to my local Barnes & Noble and again could not find a Book of Mormon. I found a number of anti-Mormon texts and I guess a lot of things about women fleeing polygamy and that type thing. And so then I was like, how do you get a Book of Mormon? A friend of mine had actually had one before, the one I picked up and tried to read several years ago. So I called him up and said, do you still have that Book of Mormon? And He said, "You're free to come to the house and look." I went to his house and looked, could not find the one that he had. And that's when I typed into Google, "How do I get a Book of Mormon?"
And then you were really in trouble, huh?
Right, because I fully expected, based on, I typed that into my computer, this little handy-dandy computer card popped up. I put in my name and address, and I think I mentioned that I'd been watching BYU-TV, and fully expected a Book of Mormon to come to me in the mail. Instead, I get a telephone call from these two young men identifying themselves as Mormon missionaries, but I didn't call them back because I didn't want to talk to any Mormon missionaries. I just wanted to read the Book of Mormon. And so I ignored the call and kept looking for the Book of Mormon in my mailbox. And that went on for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then they came and they left a little sticky note on my door, and with a smiley face, and said that they'd been about to try to see me, and they closed it with, "Keep watching BYU-TV." And that made me realize that they must really be Mormon missionaries, and so I called them up and made an appointment.
That's great. I'm sure they were like, "Oh, she's got to be the golden contact. She's watching BYU-TV."
I found out later that they did refer to me in that way. I'm not sure whether it was just because I had been watching BYU-TV. I think it's after we started the lessons, and I noticed that although they gave me a Book of Mormon, I only had a very thin volume compared to what they were using to read. So when I inquired to them, "What is it that you have?" they said that they had the Quad, which was the Book of Mormon, Bible, Pearl of Great Price, and Doctrine and Covenants. And I was like, "Well, why don't I get that too?" And they were like, "Well, we can't really afford to give, I guess, the people that we're visiting a Quad." And I was like, "But I want everything that you have." So I ordered me one.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so I think at that point they probably started looking at me as a golden contact.
Yeah, she really wants to know this. I know I would have. I served my mission in Georgia and South Carolina, so that's awesome. So you were exposed, it sounds like, before you met the missionaries, to at least polygamy, and it sounded like you knew a little bit about the ban. Is that true?
I had been only exposed to polygamy only in popular culture. So, in popular culture, when you hear the word Mormon, polygamy is kind of like linked with that in popular culture. Or I'm a big fan of Westerns, the Big Valley, the old Westerns, the Big Valley being one of my favorite old Westerns. And there was actually an episode of the Big Valley where there was a Mormon family. It was after polygamy had been outlawed, and this gentleman and his 2 wives moved from Utah to California, where the Big Valley was set. And the storyline was about how Jared recognized that he was Mormon. Jared is one of the oldest sons on the show, the oldest son on the show. And he recognized that they were Mormon. He rented to him anyway, but then when other people found out they were Mormon, they wanted to run them out of the valley, and Jared and his brothers had to intervene. So my introduction or my knowledge of polygamy was limited to what I knew in popular culture. I think I had briefly heard about polygamy in my history class, and had heard primarily about Brigham Young in my history class, not a whole lot of mention of Joseph Smith. Okay. And so I knew that about polygamy, had not really known about the priesthood ban until I started taking the lessons.
Okay. And so I believe you asked the missionaries about the priesthood ban. What was their response?
Well, I asked them about both polygamy and the priesthood ban.
Okay.
I started out with polygamy because once I got my quad, I very quickly read through the Book of Mormon. I got to the Book of Jacob, particularly the second chapter of the Book of Jacob, and I think it's like verses 31 through 35, which, I mean, it's really almost like a rant against polygamy about, how it is. The Lord is saying it grieves him that the men have wounded his daughters by doing this, etc., 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 and basically says a man shall have only one wife. And so I said to the missionaries, I'm a little bit confused because this seems to me to be pretty straightforward, saying no to polygamy. So how in the world did y'all ever do that? And their response was to refer to, I think it's the 30th verse of the second chapter of Jacob, which says something like, if I will, I'll raise up a seed unto me, as the reason for why the church later started practicing polygamy. And I was just like, I don't think that says that. But I'm going to give you that when you go on if that's your response. And then about that time, I started asking them a lot of questions about the priesthood ban, which, because although I was taking the lessons, I was also reading other things about the church.
Okay, so you weren't, it wasn't tunnel vision.
No, it was not tunnel vision. And then that's when they proceeded to bring a number of the black members. I almost felt like, because I didn't know a whole lot about the ward, it seemed like they were bringing every black member of the ward. And it was always male members because, since I lived alone, for the missionaries to be able to come and visit me, they had to bring another male member with them. And so they were always bringing black male members to try to talk to me about the priesthood ban, and they made various statements as to why. I think one said something to me about, well, if you look in the Old Testament, the Lord limited priesthood to the Levites, and then others said different things, but none of that, at least in my mind, resolved my issues with, none of what was said to me resolved my issues with either polygamy or the priesthood temple ban. And those two things, and I had some other concerns and questions too, but those two things were really at the primary reason why I was really considering not continuing the discussions and certainly not joining the church. I think I called up my missionaries one day and said, I've typed out like 26 questions I have for y'all. Do y'all have a fax machine? Can I fax these things to you? And then my missionaries said a couple of things. One of them said, well, Sister Roberts, if you're searching for truth, you don't go digging in trash searching for truth. And then my missionaries also gave me that quote from the prophet Joseph Smith about all other things pertaining to the religion being mere appendages. So after I prayed about it, in my mind, I concluded that polygamy, the priesthood temple ban, a lot of the other things about which I was concerned were all mere appendages, A, and had all been man-made appendages, B. And so having concluded that, that didn't keep me from continuing the discussions or later joining the church.
Wow, that's interesting. Because polygamy has been a big struggle for me. Even the black ban. I taught several black people in South Carolina and Georgia, and I was just praying that nobody would ever ask me that question, and I got lucky. Nobody did. And maybe that's not lucky, but from my point of view, I was like, please just don't ask me about that. It's in our past, and I don't want to talk about it. So I can only imagine. I don't know. I think I would handle it better now than I did when I was 19. But I was just grateful I didn't have to try to explain that. So,
well, I think I gave my missionaries, as they would say in Georgia, a run for their money, because I asked a number of probing questions. I think at one point when I had decided that I would have my baptismal interview, I said to them, I'm 50 years old. I'll have lived a very full life before I even contemplated joining the LDS Church. I need a grown person to interview me. I do not need to be interviewed by two 19-year-olds. And so the mission president conducted my baptismal interview.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, that's unusual. Yeah, it does happen, but that's definitely unusual. That's interesting.
Well, I think, again, because I was 50 years old and because I was contemplating making a very, very, very big change in my faith, in my life, I was going into this with my eyes wide open. And I guess I would have felt, and I know that feeling was shared by some other black people in my ward, I would have felt that my missionaries had been less than straightforward with me if I had not asked about the priesthood ban and they had not told me about the priesthood ban. And then after I joined the church, I learned about the priesthood temple ban. I would not have been a happy camper had that happened to me.
Well, what did your family think about you joining the...
Well, my family pretty much thought I had gone around the bend.
So they were not supportive at all?
No. They were not supportive. My brother is a Baptist minister. He never said anything to me, but he told my mom that she needed to stop me from joining the church. And my mom said to him, "What am I supposed to do? She's a grown 50-year-old woman." And so, but now my mom will sit down with me and will watch programs on BYU as long as they're talking about the Book of Mormon. She will feel fairly comfortable with listening to them talk about the Book of Mormon. But once they venture into, if they venture into the Pearl of Great Price or the Doctrine and Covenants, then she's just like, I don't know what that is, and I'm not. She won't. But she has sat and listened to General Conference with me.
Wow. I'm sure they talk about the Bible as well. Is she fine with that?
Oh, yeah, she's fine with that.
Yeah, okay. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Bryndis Roberts. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about patriarchy, and we'll compare how similar and different it is in the Baptist Church compared to the LDS Church.
As I think I mentioned, I fully recognize that the church was a patriarchal institution. The faith tradition from which I was coming, the Black Baptist Church, is in many ways a fairly patriarchal institution. So it wasn't that I didn't know what I was joining, but again, I really dared to believe that the concept of the priesthood and that having the priesthood lifted Mormon men up and made them, I guess, somehow not immune, but maybe that they had overcome, so to speak, some of the ways that patriarchy manifested itself in other faiths in which I had been involved.
We'll have a transcript out shortly to our subscribers. If you'd like to subscribe and get a transcript, go to gospeltangents.com and click the yellow subscribe button. For $10, I'll give you a PDF. For $15, I'll give you a printed copy. You can also do that on patreon.com/gospeltangents. So just go there as well. You can also get past interviews on our Amazon page. Go to amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you should be able to see those as well. Please like our page at facebook.com/gospeltangents, and you can get the latest updates there. Also, check our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents. Be sure to subscribe on our Apple Podcasts page. Go to tinyurl.com/gospeltangents, and you can subscribe on your iPhone or any Android device. So check that out. Now, for more great videos, click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos.